Fiscal policy, GCSE. Let's get into it. So today we're going to get into it. We're going to look at fiscal policy, definitions, policy measures. We're going to look at the effects on fiscal policy on the economy. We're going to look at the limitations, and then we're going to look at a Trump and Hillary video from back in the day. Let's get into it. So to understand this, it builds on a bit of previous knowledge. And this previous knowledge is all about what makes aggregate demand move. Now, aggregate demand just basically means total demand for the economy, right? And now, while for GCSE, you do not need to be able to draw this graph is extremely helpful to help you understand how the economy works with monetary and fiscal policy. So basically, this line is represented by 4 components, and you do need to know these components. So for a recap, total demand for everything in your whole country, that's why it's called aggregate. We know as prices of things reduce, you're going to buy more, you're comparatively richer. That's known as the wealth effect, okay? That's why it slopes down. There's a few other reasons, but we don't need to know those. Now, what makes up this line? So we've got consumption. That's me and you, consumers in the economy buying goods and services. Who else buys things in our economy? We've got businesses. They invest money in machinery and equipment and tools in the economy. We've got government spending. That's what it says on the tin, isn't it? Government spending. And exports minus imports. The idea that if you're selling lots of goods abroad via exports, you are making more money and people are spending money in your country. And we get the net balance from that from minusing imports. So these are the 4 ways people spend money in our economy. And the argument is an increase in spending will lead to AD shifting out this way. And that will lead to increases in real GDP, as we can see on the bottom here. Okay. Now, the history of fiscal policy is quite interesting. This guy here, Milton Friedman, said basically, if we're having a recession, that means people aren't buying goods and services, people are losing their jobs, we have unemployment, we have a lack of spending and businesses closing. He said eventually after a few years, people will learn to accept lower salaries and they'll get back into the workforce again. But this guy Keynes is like, nah, mate, that's rough. Instead of waiting 2 years for this to occur, how about we just create money, bing, and then throw that straight into the environment and create jobs? That'll sort us out. And so what do you think every short-termist government does these days? That's right, create money and throw it into the economy to fix it. So let's have a look. So with fiscal policy, that's pretty much what they do. So the government will change spending and taxation to influence aggregate demand, to influence total demand in the economy. So if they reduce spending, aggregate demand shifts left. If they increase spending, aggregate demand shifts right. All right, then, so let's start with contractionary fiscal policy. And think about what contraction means. It means to shrink, okay? So shrinking fiscal policy. And that's where our aggregate demand is going to go back, our total demand for goods and services in society. Remember, our total demand is these 4 parts, right? Or should I say 5 parts? So all we need is a minus in any of these for that to happen. But it just so happens fiscal policy is run by the government. So it's going to be a reduction in government spending. If you minus any of these, AD shifts back. So if inflation is really high in the economy, the average price level is super high, the government can shift back aggregate demand. They do this by reducing government spending. And what do you think they do with tax? That's right, they increase it. An increase in taxation puts less money in your pocket after work, meaning you'll spend less in society. So that will remove consumption and that will remove government spending, and aggregate demand shifts back and we reduce our inflation. But sadly, we may also reduce real GDP in society. Next, so if I added the aggregate supply, which is total supply of goods and services in the economy from every producer, we can see clearly on the graph that we're originally here with inflationary pressure, and we also had a high GDP, a high output in our society, a high total production. And what we've done is we've reduced our aggregate demand. And now we can see that our aggregate price levels, so our inflation is reduced, and also we can see that our total output is reduced. So this isn't what countries always want. They're not always keen on a reduced output for the year, but they are keen on having a reduced inflation, because basically a reduced output tends to mean increased unemployment. What about expansionary policy then? The opposite. So governments are like, oh, we're going through a recession. Keynes is our man. Let's sort it out. Let's throw money at the people. So if they're going to throw money at the people, what are they going to do? They're going to reduce tax. Here's free money, mate. Enjoy your extra salary. And they're going to increase government spending. They're going to create government jobs, even if they're unnecessary, to build roads that were already built. So again, plus government spending, more money in your pocket, so we spend more, so plus consumption. This can also lead to increases in investment if businesses make a large amount of profit, but we can see the opposite of what occurred before is occurring now. We have not only an increase in inflation, but we also have an increase in jobs for people, which is great. And later on, we'll discover that if we really want to reduce inflation, we can just do some supply side policy to get this supply forward and hopefully have more output, more production, more employment, and really stable inflation and prices. So, this policy used by the big government, Donald Trump's a massive fan of lowering taxes. What do you think some criticisms of this policy are? Pause the video and have a think. There's loads. Poor information. What if the government have got bad information about the economy? What happens if it's actually taking a turn for the better? They don't know about it and then they throw money in and it creates massive inflationary pressure. What about the time? It could take ages for fiscal policy to have any efficacy. It's supposed to trickle down over time. What if it doesn't? What if the government create useless jobs that could have been filled by the private sector? These people could have worked in different jobs and not have had to have been funded by the government. Not only that, the government are borrowing money from banks to pay for this, right? Because governments often run a budget deficit where the money they receive is less than the money they're spending. So they have to sell bonds. People that buy these bonds are investors, okay? And these investors, they might invest in the government instead of investing in private businesses. So not only are they borrowing from private investors, taking away from private firms they could have invested in, they're also borrowing from banks. And that means there's less funds available for people to borrow, pushing up interest rates. So the government getting involved too heavily can actually crowd out or damage the growth of private businesses. And what governments really need in society is good, strong private businesses to help economic growth and create jobs. So yeah, here's a look at the graph. You don't need to know this for GCSE. It's just a bigger concept of the idea of if a government demands more loans, it pushes up interest rates at the bank because the bank is a business. And it leads to investment being reduced in society. Don't worry if you don't understand this, it's no problem. Okay, more criticisms. Government spending is inefficient. Why create useless, inefficient jobs when we can let the private sector deal with it? Just wait a little bit longer. And in order for the government to attract borrowing, they have to sell bonds, right? And if people stop buying their bonds, they're going to have to give higher yields or higher rates of return to people that are buying them in order to sell them. And this can lead to more issues down the line of increasing government debt, as we're seeing in America right now. Okay, so now I have a video for you on Trump versus Hillary. It's back in the day. I want you to think about the fiscal policy they're discussing. I'm just giving you the answer to question 1. And I want you to think about what the differences are in their policies. Okay, so let's have a quick look.
But when it comes to taxes, it has become clear there are pretty big differences between the two major party candidates. Lisa Desjardins reports. It's part of our ongoing look at issues shaping this election.
Taxes, among the most powerful of government policies affecting how we live and work every day, this week sparked the first head-to-head policy speeches between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, starting with Trump Monday.
I am proposing an across-the-board income tax reduction, especially for middle-income Americans.
Trump's plan? He would simplify the tax system to just 3 smaller rates and fewer deductions. His top rate would be 33% versus the current 39.6%. We don't yet know who would see which rates.
He's more specific on the estate tax. That's the tax on inheritances over $5.4 million. Trump would eliminate that tax altogether. A big benefit for farmers and wealthy families. Republicans say it is fair and positive.
Hillary Clinton, in her economic speech in Michigan today, could not have disagreed more.
Multimillionaires should not be able to pay a lower tax rate than their secretaries.
Clinton would charge a minimum 30% tax on incomes over $1 million, and she'd raise the total tax rate to 43.6% for those making over $5 million. Clinton would not change rates for the lower or middle classes. Clinton charges that Trump...
Okay, so we can see a very distinct difference in the policies proposed by Trump and Clinton in 2016, which was a while ago. So, can you tell me the differences in their policies? So we know it's fiscal policy. We know Trump wants tax cuts for businesses. We know he wants tax cuts for individuals. And he also wants inheritance tax cuts for the rich. He is cutting taxes all across the board. Clinton, though, she's like, nah, let's tax the rich even more. Higher taxes for large profits. The problem is, if you tax companies too much, what happens? They find a way to leave the country and pay taxes elsewhere. So let's have a look at the graph then. Let's start with Trump's graph, okay? So he's wanting to put more money in pockets of the average people. That will increase consumption by lowering tax. And he also wants to lower the tax of businesses, meaning they might have more profits, which can lead to greater degrees of investment. And if you remember, C plus I plus G plus X minus M, that is our equation for aggregate demand. So it would push aggregate demand out. People will spend more, AD will shift right. Companies will spend more, investment will shift right. So we're going to have potentially an increase in inflation, but also the American jobs are back in business. What about Hillary, though? Increase the taxes, reduce business investment. Profits for businesses will be reduced, so investment will reduce. AD shifts left, average price level decreases, and this could lead to job cuts in the long run and less future expansion of organizations. Total output might reduce as well, which signifies a GDP reduction. Now, question then, which one's going to be more popular with the people? Obviously, Mr. Trump, because people want more money in their pockets. It's that simple. And big businesses have a lot of money for lobbying, and they're not going to be happy with Hillary. Or they weren't, should I say. Think about this expansion question, though. What about the outcome of this policy on the government budget? What's going to happen with Trump? The government debt's going to increase massively. But that doesn't matter, because in 4 years, he can pass it on to somebody else. Extra spending, reduced income, because their income comes from tax. And now what do we have 8 years later after this? We have massive government debt. And now we have Elon Musk working for Doge, trying to minimize government spending to pay off some of this large debt that they've created. It's all coming full circle, isn't it? But at least they're on top of it right now. It's very important to start paying this debt back. All right, that's it from me in Fiscal Policy. If you want any resources, including my revision pack, just click the link down below. Have a great day.